I'm really delighted to be able to invite Hugh Nicholson along here. Hugh has played a really important role in public art in the city. Hugh and I have worked together to produce a number of the permanent works which sit along High Street, which are currently still in the red zone. Hugh is the principal urban designer with the Christchurch City Council, and prior to that he spent 7 years working as an urban designer in Wellington. And while he was in that role, he worked with the Wellington Sculptor Trust to develop and install 16 new public artworks. And he developed an asset management plan for the council's sculptures and monuments there. He trained as a landscape architect and has also worked as a botanical illustrator before becoming an urban designer. And in Christchurch, Hugh has initiated a number of public artworks. He's been a champion for public artwork within the council, but most importantly, Hugh has been heading up the team who've been responsible from the City Council's point of view for the Central City Plan, for that visioning document that says Christchurch a garden city, a city in a garden, I think it was. And there are so many great opportunities for the arts within that plan, and a number of us have worked with Hugh and council colleagues to make sure that the arts is really pivotal, that there's a new model for the arts, that there's new opportunities for the arts and artists within our new city. And I just want to point to some pages within this resource kit that you have at the back, which have all those relevant sections of the plan outlined. So I think it's about page 28 to 34. So if you look at those different plans in your own time, and see how you might be able to reflect and respond to some of those strategies throughout the workshop, because that's really where the opportunity lies within those chapters for the arts. So without further ado, I'd like to warmly welcome Hugh Nicholson.
Thanks, Deborah, and hi everybody. Look, it's a pleasure to be here, and I have to start with a couple of apologies. And the first is for the title of the talk. Now, it's a great title, and because I was so slow at coming back to Jo and telling her what I was going to talk about, Jo had to make it up. And it's fantastic, and I looked at it and thought, actually, I'm going to talk about the past. Should I change this title? Well, it's a great title, I won't. I am looking forward to the future of Christchurch. So it's true in that sense, but I am going to talk about the past. And I guess how I thought I'd deal with this is to talk about my experience with public art, and I hope that some of it resonates with you and gives you some clues as to some of the things that I've learnt over 20 years or so of dealing with public art. And the second apology is, look, the kind of art I'm going to talk about is kind of high art. It's kind of sculptures, physical big sculptures in spaces, and it's kind of, I don't actually think that's what we need in Christchurch at the moment necessarily. I'm really looking forward to some different stuff. But look, that's where I've come from, and when I started out there wasn't much of this stuff, and so I'm not going to apologise. Actually, look, that's what I do, but I'm not expecting you to do it. So if that makes sense. So why should you even listen to me? I mean, how did I get involved in public art? It was all a terrible accident, really, to be honest. Shortly after I graduated, I spent a couple of years working in New Zealand, and I went to the UK, and I kind of, with the brashness of youth, so I bowled up to the Ebervale Garden Festival, the National Garden Festival of Wales site, and said, hey, look, I can help you design this, and got hired onto the infrastructure design team. And I know National Garden Festivals, that was the last one they've had in the UK, and effectively they take a sort of old derelict site. This one used to look like that. It was an old sort of industrial, it was a mining site in the middle of Wales, and they kind of rehabilitated it and they put in gardens. Lots of the councils and firms come and put in gardens, and hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people visit it, and they transform a site into something quite different. And I turned up on the infrastructure design team, so the team who were responsible for designing the kind of the layout and the set out of this. And being the last boy to arrive, they gave me the worst job. I had to liaise with all the artists from all over the UK who were coming to deliver site works. Nobody else wanted this job. You know, artists are difficult, they never do what they're told, they're just nothing but trouble. So, you know, I got this fantastic job where I got to deal with people from all over the UK, you know, coming to deliver. And we worked out the sites where the artworks were going, and we talked about contracts and things like that. And in theory, you know, I was helping them. I was there to tell them, you know, how to do it. In reality, you know, I had a fantastic learning opportunity where these people who knew a hell of a lot more than me taught me, you know, all about how to do my job, which is just, it was wonderful. And I kind of look back with embarrassment, really. I don't know that I really appreciated the opportunity I was given or the skills of these people, but it was a hell of a lot of fun. You know, look, I hope you can see some of those images, and there were lots of wonderful sculptures. And I guess it was my first lesson in the strength, in the way sculptures can transform spaces. And I have this kind of lovely memory of walking around the site with my manager, and he's looking over there and saying, "How the hell did that get there?" You know, and there's this sort of gleeful, you know, smile, you know, kind of thing that, you know, you approved that. You know, we agreed that sculpture was going there. And he hadn't realised what it would do. He hadn't realised that it would transform the space and that it would be so powerful. And that, for me, was a kind of learning experience, that sculpture, that art can make such a difference to a place. And when I came back to New Zealand, look, I ended up working for Whangarei District Council, working as a landscape architect, developing streetscapes and things. And look, one of the projects I was involved in was Cameron Street Mall. And in a way, look, the mall design itself is not particularly important. But if you look through the middle of this design, you might be able to see the hint of a sort of sinuous line that runs the length of this, the mall. It's the kind of storyline. And what we did is we were looking to get communities involved in this. And this storyline is just a series of bronze plaques. I don't think it's of great artistic merit, but what was important about it is we got the community, both the Maori and the Pākehā communities, to kind of write a history of Whangarei from their perspectives. Almost, you know, from the Maori one was from sort of geological beginnings, you know, the beginnings of Aotearoa and you know, key historical events, and to put those in a series of plaques, and they start at each end of the mall and they kind of meet in the middle. And it was a lesson really for me as to the power of communities, and that, you know, the community wasn't so interested in the lovely design for the mall that I'd done, but they were really interested in telling their story and creating this you know, something that they had ownership of, and that it was their mark throughout that mall, and it tied it together. And for me, it was the first indication, perhaps, that an artwork might be part of an urban space. You know, tie this whole space together. You know, a linear line throughout, running, you know, literally and, you know, figuratively through the middle of this mall. My other great learning here in Whangarei was the mayor of Whangarei was a man, Stan Semenov. He used to run a trucking company. But his reputation was that when his truckers crossed him, he punched them. You know, he was pretty, you know, he's a pretty redneck fellow. And certainly when he didn't like what you were telling him, he'd sort of, you know, get half out of his chair, you know, and you could see him bristling with anger and kind of going red. Kind of, you know, interesting experience. And anyway, at some stage, you know, Hundertwasser was still alive at that stage, and he was spending 6 months of the year in Northland, you know, in his house somewhere in the bush. And somehow we managed to persuade Stan to go and see Hundertwasser. I had no idea what to expect, you know, this sort of redneck trucker turning up in the middle of the bush with this, you know, internationally acclaimed architect. Anyway, Stan came back a changed man. You know, he had an epiphany in the bush, to my amazement, and he showed me this sketch. You know, apparently this is what Hundertwasser had designed for him on the spot, and as Stan explained it, I kind of understood. This building, you know, what Stan loved about it is this building was on the offices of the regional council, and the regional council was Stan's, you know, arch enemy, his nemesis. You know, like all, you know, local authorities, regional and local councils hate each other. So Stan just, you know, art gave him the opportunity to crush the regional council, you know, to literally, figuratively. But in a way, the lesson for me is that, look, to get great art done is not just about the idea of art. I will show you ideas, great ideas, which have come to nothing. It requires political will to go beside it. And the political will may be for entirely different reasons than the art, So it's a, Stan didn't like Hundertwasser because of his architecture, unfortunately. He did like, so the agendas may be quite different, and that doesn't matter. That's just recognising that you need political will as well as a great artistic idea to get things done. Interestingly, look, this is a model created by the Hundertwasser Foundation. That idea is still floating. The Whangarei District Council's put some money towards it. I don't think it's enough. But, one day we might see an art gallery on the side of the regional council in Whangarei. And it would be a great thing, I think it would be a tremendous tourist attraction. I'm not sure if it would be great art, but that's, And I moved to Wellington after that, and to work for the Wellington City Council, and I was very fortunate there in that I dealt with the Wellington Sculptor Trust. So they're kind of a private group of individuals, a trust, who raise money for sculptures. And generally they run a partnership with the council there, that they raise half, the council provides half the money, and they build sculptures, and been tremendously successful, very visionary, and I guess I was the sort of council half of that partnership for a number of years. And that was probably a bit like the Garden Festival. It was just the dud job that nobody else wanted to do because it was too much, trouble. But again, it was a wonderful, a wonderful partnership. And I guess the third leg, of that, I was talking about political will and I was talking about artistic ideas. The third leg that you kind of need to get right is the funding. You've got to find funding. All those three things have to come together at the same time to deliver a great work of public art. You have to get them all sorted out, and if any one of them falls over, then the project falls over. Look, the Lambton Quay Sculpture Series, basically a private trust came to the council and said, we want to put, I can't remember how much money it was now, it was a reasonable chunk of money, we want to give it to the city to do something worthwhile. What should we do? And the CEO kind of rang my manager and said, what should they do? And the manager turned to me and said, right, give us 4 options. So I wrote down 4 options, and one of them was to create a sculpture series along Lambton Quay. And that was the one that the trust selected, they liked the most. And we set about creating 4 sculptures down Lambton Quay, which is the busiest street in Wellington, so it has the highest pedestrian counts. And I guess that was a turnaround from putting, until then the Sculptor Trust had been putting sculptures in parks, nice lovely landscapes, quiet, without too many people around. And look, I really wanted to put them where the people are, People won't go to art, let's put the art right in amongst them so they bump into it and they walk around it and they jostle with it and it has meaning for them. It was a little bit of a lesson to me as well. We ran an international competition to select these artworks. And it still grieves me to remember, the hundreds and hundreds of great ideas that, models, drawings that sat, were drawn together and they sat there and so many great ideas were wasted. They went nowhere because we could only build, only make 4 of them. And so in a way, I've always tried to go back to a selected sort of tender process, so to ask for a limited number of artists to put forward an idea rather than just putting out a general invitation, and that's because I still remember what I felt was just this waste of creativity and energy and a waste of people's time. So that was a learning for me there. And it was also a learning in how to build on the past. And look, I think that is going to be a key role for art in Christchurch in the coming years. Look, we've lost just a massive amount of Christchurch's heritage, of the meaning. Look, in a way, public art is just part of a landscape, of an urban landscape. There are lots of other things which give meaning to urban landscapes as well as art. Art's very important, but, there are lots of buildings, history spaces, the events, they all give meaning, and Christchurch has lost an awful lot of that. And in a way, how we build, how the art can kind of build and refer back to our past, I think will be a really important role going forward. And look, in the Lambton Quay Sculpture Series, we said we wanted it really to, Lambton Quay is the old shoreline in Wellington, and in a way we wanted to reflect, that shoreline, and that was the brief we gave to the artists. And as always artists do, they never give you exactly what you want, but they came back with their interpretations. And look, Jeff Thompson, his shells, the one on the left-hand side, he was creating an archaeology of the consumer. You know, there are a whole lot of consumer items in there, which are the things you buy along, you know, Lambton Quay in the shops. And he was kind of talking about, you know, well, what would happen if, what will the archaeology of our age be? What will somebody find when they dig up Lambton Quay one day? And you know, Invisible City is a, you know, it's a poem in Braille about the city, and you know, very beautiful. Interestingly, you can't read the Braille on that sculpture. I thought this was a terrible idea when I first saw this sculpture. I thought, how could you make a sculpture? And the Braille is so large, you can't read it, you know. But actually, it's a stunningly beautiful piece, and I'd really recommend you visit it. And it has a real, it holds the space really beautifully. Anton Parsons, and it is a very beautiful. It's very tactile. You want to touch it. You want to know what it means, and it doesn't reveal itself easily. This is another work from that series, Spinning Top by Robert Yankee, and the circular shape. This is on a turntable at the end of a dead-end lane, you know, where you go up, and there used to be a turntable so the cars could turn around and go back down again. So he's created a spinning top, refers to that. But also the icons on the surface of this are about the Maori history of this site, of this place. He's talking about, you know, how the iwi arrived there, where they settled, what they did. You know, it was a very significant site. So in a way, you know, the art is revealing something, you know, about the place. It's making it richer and drawing it to our attention. This is, Kai Whakateri by Brett Graham. These are these beautiful kind of objects are the navigational or symbols which represent the navigational tools by which the Maori arrived in New Zealand, and you know, it's certainly not by accident. It's sitting next to the beehive. You know, it's a reminder of of who was here first and how they got here. Seismic. It's a work by Louise Purvis outside the Victoria University, again right downtown in Wellington. Very relevant to us now. It's kind of and these are all objects, you know, derived from the fault lines and the kind of, you know, the earthquakes and images, you know, providing kind of layers of meaning and a whole. I mean, they do much more than that. That's just one of the layers, but I guess it's one of the things that I think will, I hope the public art in Christchurch can do is tell some stories. Fun. Look, the other kind of area I think, we need a lot of in Christchurch at the moment is fun. This, the green, the protoplasm in Lambton Quay, was one of the first sculptures Phil Price, created. And he had a few technical problems with it. He was still learning at that stage, and we had to take it down to get it repaired. And in the end, what we thought we'd do is we just put up a replacement, another kind of, he'd made a series of these, just another one, different shape, different colour. We just put it up overnight and see if anybody noticed. We didn't tell anybody, just put it up there and kind of waited to see if anybody noticed what happened, And it was kind of just a lovely story with, suddenly the newspapers realised that something had changed, and, it was just a nice way of capturing. I have to say that after a year, with protoplasm being fixed, it became a bane in my neck because everybody kept, asking me when the hell they were getting it back because they liked the original more. But, it was fun while it lasted. I guess the other kind of realisation in Wellington I came to is that, sculpture, I don't think you could say our public art can transform cities, but it can be part of a transformation. And, Wellington, 30 years ago was dull, grey, boring, windy. It was a city which, nobody went to. It was a terrible place, like Canberra. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. It had no heart. There came a transformation, when Wellingtonians started to be proud and cool. It was a cool place to be. It was funky. It was colourful and energetic. And in a way, I always see this sculpture series along Cobham Drive, which is the main road in from the airport. So it was like a gateway to Wellington, is representing that, that transformation. Wellington's windy. Get over it. We love it. That's how, Wellingtonian, when you talk to them and you ask them about the wind, and they'll just shrug, get over it. If you don't like it, go away somewhere else. And in a way that, so this kind of sculpture series became, is synonymous for me with that transformation, where a city reinvented itself, started to think about itself differently. It is an interesting lesson on some of these sculptures. This zephyrometer, which I'll talk a bit more about it later on. The other artwork I was in, another series of artworks I got involved with was the Writers' Walk in Wellington. And when this came about, it came about through a series of, through one of the writers, associations coming to the council and saying, we want to put in some plaques, celebrating famous Wellington writers. And they were imagining putting some bronze plaques, little bronze plaques with a quote from these famous writers sort of in the ground in Civic Square. And, there are some around Christchurch actually very like that, if you have a look. And I kind of said, no, go away. If you want to do this, we'll consider it if you come back. And if the plaques are works of art in their own right, so they're really beautiful things, and the quotes talk to the landscape, they talk to place. They're of a place. The quote not only gives meaning to the landscape somebody's looking at, the view, but the landscape gives meaning to the quote. And to their credit, they went away and they came back with this, Wellington Writers' Walk. And if you walk around the waterfront in Wellington, you'll see these beautiful, plaques by Catherine Griffiths, and tremendous kind of selection of quotes, which they talk to the view, they talk to the place. And to me, public art is more than just a piece of art. It has to talk to the space that's in it, and the space talks back to it, and together they make something greater than the parts. So I guess on an even greater scale. I think Catherine Griffiths was talking about the immediate kind of site, to the immediate sites next to her works. This was a proposal for a gateway to Wellington along State Highway 1 by a collaboration of artists and landscape architects. And they were really using kind of the idea of a borrowed landscape. It was like it's a Japanese concept. So they were taking when a Japanese garden, they borrow the landscape outside the garden to make the garden seem larger and to give it meaning. And in this way, this sculpture only makes sense when you think about New Zealand. That Wellington Harbour is the mouth of Maui, of Maui's fish. The South Island is the canoe, and he pulls up the fish. So this hook only makes sense. He's borrowing the whole of New Zealand to make a sculpture, which is kind of wonderful, very ambitious. Actually, it didn't go ahead for a number of reasons. It had a few problems with cost, was one, but even that was surmountable. But it had a laser. The fishing line, for the hook was a laser shining up into the sky. And it turned out in the end it fell down on civil aviation regulations because airplanes come flying into the airport, and it was going to be an aeronautical risk. So that's kind of why it never happened, which is a shame really, because it's a exceedingly beautiful idea. I'm not sure it would have looked quite like that, but yeah. So in a way, it just I just think when you're dealing with public art and public space, it's not all about the art. It's this kind of interaction. It's this greater meaning that the space gives to the art and vice versa. And I think sometimes, literally, the spaces change the meaning or add new meanings to art. And I was going to talk about one or two of those in a little while. So after Wellington, I came to Christchurch, and I was very lucky here with the Art and Industry Trust and SCAPE, again, kind of having a great collaboration, an opportunity to collaborate with some great partners. And when I first arrived, which I think it's the next slide, one of the early meetings when I was at Christchurch City Council, I was invited to a meeting about nucleus. So this is Phil Price's sculpture, the red sort of disc on the left. And Art and Industry wanted to give this sculpture to the city. They'd commissioned it, they wanted to give it to the city. And I sat in this meeting, and a whole lot of bureaucrats sat around, and they kind of found reasons not to accept it. Oh, you can't put it there, you can't do that. They wanted to put it in the Hagley Park, and there's management plans, and God knows what else. And in the end, I said, look, I'll do it. I'll find a site for it. Just leave it to me, and I'll sort it out, which is fantastic from my point of view. But really what I tried to do is to put it into an urban context, not to try and put it somewhere safe, but to actually, this site had, you all know it had one-way streets, it was noisy, it was dirty, it was competing with buildings. and to my mind, I wanted art, the art to do that, if it was good enough to survive in that space. And again, we created a series of artworks on High Street, Passing Time on the right, and Flower Power, at the head of High Street. And again, I suppose that was a little bit of a philosophy to me, and partly it's because, maybe we don't have the budgets in New Zealand to create really grand works of art. But I kind of think that, this kind of association, these series of works talking to each other, actually is a really positive thing. So it's a kind of conversation with the city, with the spaces, and a conversation with other artworks. The council also rebuilt the civic offices while I was there. Trying to see if Neil's here. I'm sure he is somewhere. But, and look, one of the things, as usual, we never had enough money. And when I was talking about the problem with Neil, he kind of said, "Oh, look, I've got a couple of artworks in my back." Just out the back of the workshop, wasn't it, Neil? Basically. So there were two artworks, and the feather, the feathers. I think he had a couple of feathers out the back, and ripples. Ripples 2, is it the formal title? I'm not sure, Neil. But anyway, it's a plaster work, and in fact, I think, as I understand it, the feather and the ripples were never conceived together. Neil, they were separate works. He brought them together for a show in the art gallery just a few years ago, and then we found, if you like, we suggested perhaps another site in the civic offices. And look, the really beautiful thing about this, I think, is that this is right outside the council chamber. This is, all the councillors are sitting in there and they're making decisions, and they come out the door of the council chamber and there's the sculpture right in front of them, bang, and in a way, for me, it speaks about, the pen, the power of the pen to actually change the world, to the effects, the consequences of decisions they're making. It kind of, from what I think was abstract works, the place gives them another layer of meaning, another kind of, I don't think it takes away from the abstract strength of them. It just is another way of kind of thinking about them. And I guess it's an example to me of a way a place gives a work meaning, beyond that which the work is, beyond what's intrinsic in the work. This is one of Julia's works, Not, in the civic offices as well. Very beautiful, really well worth checking out. And I think, as I understand it, Julia would see this as an abstract work. She attaches no meaning to it, as I understand it. It is an abstract work. But for me, because of this location, this is above, the counter where you go and pay your rates and do all these things. It speaks of networks and city blocks and water and, power and, all there's this beautiful kind of knot of, it's kind of, so again, to me, it's something where the sight of it gives it a kind of a layer of meaning which perhaps, wasn't there in the original work. And I don't think it detracts from it, but it is perhaps a way in which space and art kind of interact. They shape each other. A couple of other kind of things. So far I've talked about very conventional forms of sculpture, and these are conventional as well. But I guess time. Artworks don't have to function all the time. I think these two stunning works in Wellington, Sky Blues and Water Whirler. Water Whirler only operates, for 5 minutes every hour. You have to be there at the right time for an event. It's an event, in a sense where, Water Whirler comes, it's a Len Lai sculpture conceived afterwards. So maybe, a sculptor doesn't have to be there all the time. It's this idea of time. And Sky Blues, you really only appreciate at night. It's beautiful neon sculpture, Bill Culbert, but really, it's only works, I think, in the evening. And look, Christchurch has a strong tradition of temporary sculptures through SCAPE, so there's no surprises here. But this is another temporary kind of interaction on an architectural scale. Gregor Krieger, Red Arch, in the archway in Wellington, kind of inside it, kind of a talk. It's made out of recycled materials. It's constructed from your local rubbish dump. It was a very powerful piece. It was there for a month or two. Green Island. So in Wellington, again, they have 4 plinths in by Te Papa, and they have a program of changing artworks that go on those plinths. You know, they're there for a year or so. And again, I kind of think this idea of change, and for me, for Christchurch, I think we're going to live in a really, you know, our environment will be changing. Well, it has changed and we've had no choice about it. And it's going to change a lot more. And in a way, I think art perhaps, you know, needs to be working in the same idiom and the, you know, and speaking to the same kind of, you know, changing opportunities. A few little, I won't spend long on these. These are just perhaps other ways in which I've worked with artists. So some sort of collaborations, working on art and infrastructure, I guess. Seats, you know, bollards, you know, in Wellington. So it's kind of, and look, it happens on a much larger scale. I always think the City-to-Sea Bridge in Wellington is a really good example of a bridge over a road which was created with artists and which the artists were the art is an integral part of the infrastructure. So I just think there's that's another way in which artists, get involved. So I was going to change pace a little bit and talk, about if you work on council land and public space, what to expect when you create public art with a council, because it's not always that straightforward. Actually, the first question is, who is the council anyway? Because what you find is, look, it's not one person, it's a whole lot of personalities, and like schizophrenia or any of these things, can have some really bad sides to it. And when you get the answer from one personality, it may not be the same. You may not get the same answer from another, part of the council. So it's kind of understanding when you deal with the council, you're actually dealing with a whole lot of different departments with different people. They've got different roles, they've got different responsibilities. And I just think if I can give you a snapshot of the kind of people you might come across if you ever work with a council, you won't be quite so surprised when it doesn't all come together that smoothly. So look, the head of the council, are the democratically elected councillors, in theory anyway. Sometimes you wonder, but they're the people who make the decisions. And look, and for a big work of art, you're likely to to come across them and deal with them. We try, and certainly in Christchurch and in Wellington, we tried to separate art selections as choosing public artworks from the councillors. So with their councillors' support, and they recognised they weren't experts in public art and they didn't want to choose it. So we kind of created an environment where they delegated that authority to a kind of advisory group, which would choose the artworks. But still, we had to inform the councillors and tell them, and and the artist would have to come up in front, make a presentation to the councillors, and there's a whole kind of a public kind of public speaking and a kind of an understanding the public agenda kind of thing that you may need to get your head around if you end up in that position. And look, it can be really positive. Some councillors, hopefully, usually there are a few champions on a council, and there'll be people who just don't get it at all and don't know why we're spending any money on it. The second kind of area you really, you'll come up against is the city plan and resource consents. And look, the city plan is a document which states what a person can do on their property, as of right. So if you have a bit of land, what you can build, what you can construct, what sort of land use you can do on it, as of right, and and there's a process. If you want to go outside that, there's a process for going a resource consent process for getting a resource consent to do what you want to. Now, in theory, it all sounds good, and you'd think the city plan should love public art. The problem is city plans were written under a huge amount of pressure and time and things, and most of them never thought about public art whatsoever. So we kind of end up in this environment where we almost always have to apply for resource consents, and I've done more of them than I care to remember, in order to get permission to put a bit of public art, there. The Wellington, the Cobham Drive series of wind sculptures, it was sited on a bit of wasteland next to a 4-lane road, which was designated for natural protection. I think it was a natural area. So we had to get a resource consent every time we put a sculpture there, and we had to show we weren't, degrading the natural environment, and get everything from noise, assessments and so on in order to get permission. And this is the council doing it. So I, as a representative of the council, I had to get a resource consent in order to put this a sculpture on a bit of road. And generally, they cite, they fix, the location of the sculptures, and they'll say, what you can do and so on. And look, you end up in all sorts of kind of, silly situations, with Zephyrometer, which is the very tall kind of wind wand going into Wellington, spins, swings backwards, really beautiful, Phil Price. We Phil arrived from Canterbury, from Amberley, with the base on the back of his truck, and come over in the ferry, and we arrived on site and we put it down and we realised that actually we got the wrong side on the consent. It was in the wrong place. When you look down Cobham Drive, you wanted to see this wand right at the end, like a sort of needle on your Speedo, swinging backwards and forwards, telling you how strong the wind was, and it wasn't there. So, we kind of just agreed on the spot. Well, don't ever quote me about this and I'll never do it again, but we just moved it on the spot, And then Phil and I just made sure we were never in the same room, and people would ask Phil, it's not in the right spot, what happened? He said, oh, Hugh Nicholson, he was there, and he approved it, that's all right. And then when they'd tackle me and I'd say, oh, God, artists, they never do what they're told, Look, we got away with it, but it is awkward, and I guess you kind of have to be reasonably confident that you're not going to be, you can get away with it. But then you have to get a building consent, and that's a whole different ballgame. So the Building Act, makes councils responsible for the strength and the safety of buildings, I guess. So it's and structures like sculptures. Public art, so there has to be strong enough to stand up, and obviously in Christchurch that's a big thing. We don't want it to fall over in an earthquake, so anything you design is going to have to be engineered. If it's any larger, well, it depends how big it is. If you're just working on paper, you're probably okay, but if you want to build a structure which is taller than 2 metres, you're probably going to have to get a building consent. You'll have to have an engineer certify it, and it'll get built. And look, it's a painful business. There'll be all sorts, because of the way these things can be defined. You might end up having to, you think about things like disabled access and a variety of different issues. But it is important as well. So, it's quite a different part of council to the resource consents, different agenda, different reason for operating, and it'll require a different set of skills. So for a building consent, you might need an engineer, or you will need an engineer, and possibly other professionals as well. For a resource consent, you might need a planner, a lawyer preferably. She's looking at Jen. And you may well need, I've carried out noise assessments, lighting assessments, so you needed kind of people to provide those. Once you've got the building consent and the resource consent, you might think you're all cleared to go. But no, that's not the way it works. They do the regulatory stuff, but council owns the land, and another branch of the council, they're like the landowner, like the property. You have to get the permission of council as a property owner to put the sculpture on their land. So it's actually the same, for private land. You can apply for a resource consent to build a house on your neighbour's property. You can get a resource consent, but you can't build a house unless your neighbour agrees. That's just the way it is. So, kind of you want to, and in a way, getting this, you need to get this before you get the resource consent, really. You get the permission of the council. And there'll be different departments in council who look after different bits of land. So there'll be a roading, somebody will look after the streets, somebody will look after the parks, and they're different parts of council. And look, depending on how big the council is, and this is not the case, sometimes the people who manage the operations on the land are separate from the people who look after the assets, look after the land. That makes sense. So it's particularly the case with streets. So you'll have a group of people who look after roads. They're responsible. They do all the asphalting on them. They put the road markings, that kind of stuff on. But then there'll be a group of people who look after the operations, the way the roads function, the traffic lights and things like that. And they'll decide, what traffic lights goes where and who turns left and so on. And you'll probably have to get the agreement of both of those groups, if you're putting a sculpture on a road, for example. So just, they're different kind of voices. There may well be a public art advisory group. There is in Christchurch. So this is the kind of group who kind of, they advise the council on what's good public art and what's bad public art. So the public art advisory group, in Christchurch does that. There may not be as well, but And there's possibly an asset owner for public art, and they may be different to the guys you've just talked to above, who are the guys who look after the street and the site. You're putting it on. Well, there may be somebody who looks after sculptures, and they may not be the same. They may be the same. Sometimes they are, depending on the size of the council. So often public art asset owners are in parks and green space for some reason. Don't ask me why, but that's just, my observation is that happens pretty often. And then there'll be a group of people who look after the maintenance. And they're probably different as well. They're probably contracted to the asset owner, the person who owns the public art. So there'll be somebody who's contracted to do the maintenance, and they'll want to have a look at the art for sure, and to figure out whether or not they can look after it and how much it'll cost and what problems there are. So you kind of, yeah. And then in some places you'll have what we call a capital program group. They're the people who, so when council builds things, sometimes, building roads and things is it's a skill, engineers and surveyors. They're not necessarily the people who look after or own the land. They may just have a group which is just focused on building things, and you might end up dealing with those, people as well. So it probably sounds absolutely terrifying. You wonder how the hell do you ever get anything done at the council? Well, and in a sense it is complex, and hopefully there'll be somebody. I mean, my job, I always think, is just kind of helping people get through this labyrinth of kind of corridors, sort of, slightly Byzantine kind of, just getting them to talk to the right people to make the right decisions. What will council ask? Well, this is just a kind of a bit of a warning as to what they're probably not. I really wish they'd ask you whether it's good art. They'd be interested in what you're producing, but they probably won't. They'll probably just, what they will want to know is, will it fall over? It's a big deal at the moment. How's it maintained? So you kind of need to think about, what's involved in maintaining it. How long, what's its lifespan? How long do we expect it to stay there for? And what do we do to look after it? Health and safety, it's a big issue. Look, I hate to say it, but when you deal with public spaces, you deal with the lowest common denominator. The things that happen in public toilets, you just don't want to know about. And we're constantly looking at sculptures, thinking, what can go wrong? What will people use this for that you didn't intend? And if you want to see a space like that, if you go to Wellington, go to Tiaro Park, there's a beautiful prow, of kind of Maori, an interpretation of a Maori, a prow on a canoe, and you can get inside it. Actually, even worse is the bridge, the City Sea Bridge. I've just had a blank about the artist's name, but there's a beautiful wooden sculpture on the side. It's got a whole lot of spaces people get inside and they inhabit. I think they're just closing them up at the moment, actually, because they've had so much trouble. And for a while, the maintenance guys when they went to clean this out, they had to wear kind of, armour, because they'd find needles in there, for public health reasons. And we might laugh, but actually not a hell of a lot of fun when you've got to get in there and clean out the debris of, junkies and things. Traffic management, look, really boring. You think, oh, crikey. But you need to, getting a big sculpture on site is an issue, and and it'll cost a surprising amount of money to do it, So it'll be an issue. Look, I was just going to mention a couple of other things very briefly. One of the problems you might have is insurance. So most councils require some sort of public liability insurance, and which is quite expensive. And I've been talking with a few people here, and it can be quite expensive, and particularly when you're starting out, it's difficult to kind of sort out. And I just know that Gap Filler, and I know Trent's here somewhere, and Coralie have kind of developed a bit of a model where they've got a trust which is basically set up a public indemnity insurance sort of on behalf of people who are doing temporary activities in gaps. And I just think it's possible. It has the bones of a really good model for artists, particularly as they start out, to be sharing those costs and combining them. So I think I'll probably just about finish there. I guess, look, this is Christchurch as we see it now. A lot of those big sculptures I talked about are still there. They stood up really well. And I guess, for me, what's the future of Christchurch? And I really hope that public art can help us get there, and, it'll provide a commentary on the way. But look, really happy to take any questions. Go. it is a conversation we still have to have. Look, in a way, I kind of, I kind of feel these are landmarks of a city that isn't there anymore. And for me, they bring back memories. And look, one of the things I loved about this sculpture was that, that red kind of, circle kind of mirrored the beautiful dome on the A&Z building, the Flatiron building on the corner. There was a little conversation between these two red circular forms. Now the A&Z's gone, to me it's it's an important memory of what was there. I think it's a conversation we have to have as to whether, whether it's appropriate to move these, and maybe, probably isn't a right or a wrong answer, or a yes or a no, but it is an issue. Yeah. Mm. Any other questions? Yeah. Sorry, I think the microphone's coming. Yeah.
You know how the ultimate responsibility for the rebuild is in the hands of someone else, not the City Council.
That's right.
What sort of relationship is there between City Council and that group as to how much space is going to be given to art? Or is it, is it going to become something that's not economically important and pushed under the carpet?
I don't think I've got the final answer on that for you. Obviously, in the draft Central City Plan, we put aside some initiatives for art, and we clearly thought that transitional activities were really important. The minister said that he's endorsed the majority of Volume 1, where those commitments were made. I guess when I talked about that triumvirate of if you like of art, political will, and money. I guess really money and to a certain extent political will are still they're still being formed. But look, I'm hopeful that we'll see some good art, great art come out of this.
Just looking at the kind of examples of sculptures that we've got, and we've got an opportunity now, to sort of actually work, like the look of the streets and things like that could be changed. And I'm just wondering if there is any kind of structure within the council or some kind of way in which artists can be involved at that level, but not, like the kind of pathway that you've outlined is that we as artists, we come up with some bright ideas and then we negotiate through this labyrinth to get there. And so we've sort of been allocated these spots. And I think we could have a much more effective input if we were actually brought in at the sort of planning stages to talk with the landscape designers and things like that. And I just wondered if you've entertained that idea. And also maybe we'll, talk to, I actually know very little about this, but I was just very impressed by a presentation given by someone representing the parkour movement. And I think she was completely misunderstood, because basically she was told to go and see a gap filler and they might give her a gap, which is not anything. That's completely at odds with that movement, which is where urban furniture, has a multiple kind of function. Like a park bench could be used as a sleeping space, perhaps at night, or it could be used as for skateboarders to roll over. And I think those ideas are extraordinarily interesting for artists to be involved with, and they're ideas that I think we have just such an incredible opportunity to develop here. I think we've got to, we have an opportunity to do something that's just not brooches within the city. And I just wondered if you could comment on whether you.
It's a fabulous question, thank you, Julia. And look, when I put up a few images of kind of seats and and kind of and talked about infrastructure, and they weren't good examples. I apologise. I should have thought there are some very good examples where artists are involved much more integrally in the design of infrastructure in the space, and I didn't show you good examples of that. And it would be great to be able to do that in Christchurch. I guess. when I look around the political landscape, I see a number of juggernauts kind of, driving around, and one of them is simply the sheer scale of the renewal of infrastructure. So, rebuilding streets and things. We've got a kind of alliance between SCAPE, it's called SCAPE, and it's between the government, the council, various contractors and things to replace basically pipes and the vertical, the horizontal infrastructure, roads, pipes, drainage, and they've got just a massive job. They're trying to commission $10 million of work every week. It's crikey, and 250 engineers sitting there trying to pump it out. And we're trying to get some inroads into them and saying, well, actually, when you put it back, maybe you shouldn't just put it back the same way as you put it back before. Maybe you should make it a little bit better. No more expensive. Maybe we don't need all that asphalt. Maybe we could put some grass and trees back. And that's kind of a discussion we're having with them. I guess it would be really nice to tie artists into that, but it's hard for me to see the opportunity at the moment for doing that. Something, I'll bear in mind, and I hope, that, you keep on raising, but it is, it's simply the kind of, it's just the structure that's been set up and the way it's been set up. It's hard to see how you get an inroad. I don't know, that's kind of how I have to operate, is I'm looking for opportunities to get involved in things and to raise them, and I can't necessarily see. And that's not because it's right or wrong, it's just because I can't see an opportunity at the moment. I'm more hopeful about the design of some of the key facilities and, and the sort of things that Jerry's talking about, the Minister's talking about in terms of, places like the Convention Centre, the Metro Sports, and I'd really like to try and get, if I can, I'll try and get artists involved in those design teams early on. The extent of involvement, varies, and often it depends on the artist and it depends on the, the project team and, a variety of other things, but it's something, I hope that'll be an opportunity. I'm not sure who will be asked to do that, so, it's a little unclear as well. Probably doesn't answer your question, sorry, Julia, but it is a good question. It's a really good issue.
Thank you, Hugh. It's been fantastic talk. I actually just really wanted to echo Julia's comment about artists being involved in a particular moment in the process, which is at the beginning. It's at the first moment. And I understand how difficult that might, or maybe I don't understand, but it's apparent just how difficult that might be. But I just want to point to a couple of examples, and it's one of the things your talk I wanted to raise around, and they're from the Sydney situation, which is just the one I know. So when Sydney got the Olympics and decided, gee, we need to look better than we do because it's such a poorly run city, we're going to replay in a bunch of inner city areas. And most of it was semi-competitive tendering. But I have no idea how they managed to get this through, but somewhere in the brief for all that was every urban design architect team had to have an artist as part of that team for their brief for their tender to be accepted as a tender. Now, it led to some pretty strange situations where artists I know were getting phone calls, from architects that happened to meet at an opening 3 months earlier and swap business cards and would you be part of our team? The brief goes in next week. It's kind of like, can we add your name? But amongst all that kind of, mania of a tender process, there were some situations where you got the sense, and there were some winning tenders, you got the sense where you could see the artist's perspective just very subtly in what was being done. And it, for a moment, made artists feel like they actually were desired as something other than ornaments to the city process. The flip side of that, which is also the Sydney situation, when you talked about maintenance and political will, 2 days after the Olympics finished, they stopped picking up the rubbish every day, and they stopped watering the gardens and cleaning the gardens every day, and they stopped caring, at least in a demonstrable way, about the projects that had taken place. So the Sydney of City Sculpture Walk, which is a bunch of artist commissions, really interestingly conceptualised and produced supposedly only the first half for the opening of the Olympics, those projects have fallen into incredible disrepair, and they're now quite an embarrassment in the urban landscape. And I know there's a new team in council who are recognising that and trying to work with that. Similarly, the model of ensuring that artists are part of design briefs is just gone. I mean, it was like the world's no longer watching best practice and go out the window. So that thing about political will plays into not what you immediately do to reconstruct a situation, but how you follow that through. And that from outside of a council situation for myself, that seems to be almost the hardest part.
I think
you can get something done, but then to actually look after it and build on it when people are no longer watching to the same extent politically, that's difficult.
It is a good model, including artists in the design teams. Actually, I managed to do it with Neil on a bridge. Well, we commissioned Transit New Zealand. They were NZTA, New Zealand Transport Authority commissioned a bridge outside the airport. Where they put Russley Road over the top of Memorial Ave. Who knows whether it needed to happen, but one of the things we negotiated with them, and first we told them to put it underground, and they all just about had a hernia. So we said, okay, well you can, but you have to commission a good bridge, and you have to have an artist as part of the design team. And I mean, Neil might like to comment on how successful or otherwise it was. Quite different approaches. Some of them were really led by the artist. Some of them were sort of, there was a few nice tack-ons on the sides. So it was an interesting process, and that's, I guess, what I'd hope we can achieve with these key facilities. But I guess what worries me is in the real infrastructure, where the real money's being spent. I might be wrong, but I just think when they're commissioning, these hundreds of miles of pipes, they're not going to think about art.
Just aware that we're running a little close to time. We should probably wrap it up.
I'll try to be here.
Hugh's going to try and be back here for afternoon tea, so if you do have any further questions, I suggest you take advantage of his time then and hit him up. He is a rather difficult man to pin down at the best of times. But thank you very much, Hugh, for your presentation. It was very much appreciated and obviously stimulated a lot of conversation and discussion here. We're now going to split into our groups. So A for apple stays here, green. B for blue goes into the other group. And we'll pick up with those two teams and go from there.